Hey everybody, this is Mike Wan of Susquehanna Alchemy. The Gregorian calendar date is August 31st, year 2023, and I would like to share with you the findings and the results of a 33-night road trip from Pennsylvania to California and back, which occurred this summer. And the purpose of this road trip, though pilgrimage is probably a greater or a more accurate description, was to delve into the mystery of life. And what I'm here to share with you today are the findings. I don't know if results are the right word, but it is a remarkable journey, if I do say so. So let us begin. So the trip was taken with me, my partner Christy, and for the first half, her 10-year-old daughter, and we visited many people and saw many people along the way, but Christy and I were the primary players, if you will. And we both approached the trip, or knew that the trip was a dive into the mystery. But, you can't just, I guess you can, but you can't just get in the car and drive. You need a little bit, or at least we wanted a little bit of grounding principles. So knowing that we are looking to discover something that we don't even know what we're looking for, we grounded the trip 4 different ways. So the first way was river water intermingling. And what we did was we began by collecting water in the Susquehanna River, which is where we began in Pennsylvania. And then as we went west, we intermingled it with other rivers, usually ones of great significance: the New River, the Mississippi River, then the Pacific Ocean and the Rio Grande. Initially, I think our plan was to hit many more rivers, but these were the ones where we actually did the work. And this is an ancient practice. This is cultures before our own would weave their lives to the environment, the baseline reality in which they live their lives by doing this, by either bringing river stones from one river to another, or from water from one water source to another, is a way to integrate their life with where the life is lived. In fact, there wasn't really seen as any separation between their lives and what we would call nature. So that was one of our grounding principles, because when you dive into the mystery, you can get lost in it. So one of the ways to not get lost would be this practice. Secondly, we approached our trip as an aero circulation mission. And if you're familiar with the work which we put out earlier this year, a lot of it has to do with a book called A Story Waiting to Pierce You. And I recommend it to everyone. But in the book, it begins by telling the story of perhaps a mythical character, perhaps a historical character, known as Eberus the Skywalker, who traveled throughout Greece and I guess we would call it Eastern Asia, carried by an arrow as a Mongolian shaman for the purpose of purification of the land. And it was in the book. It's written by Peter Kingsley, and he positions that Eberus, which many historians take as just a mythical character, was possibly an actual person, and Kingsley points to the fact, or really weighs into the mystery of life. And so years ago, I made an artistic object which I knew was special, but upon first reading this book, probably 5 years after I made that object, I realized it was an arrow. It was clearly an arrow. And it was a very meaningful object to me. So upon reading this book and seeing what happened naturally, me making this arrow, I realized that I had already embodied this arrow circulation sort of motif in my life. And so we took that further. We took this idea literally, and we carried the arrow with us as arrow carriers. And we didn't necessarily think that we were purifying the land per se, but we wanted to ground our experience in that. And, perhaps the land which was being purified was really just a symbol of our own physical bodies. But nonetheless, that was one of the grounding principles which we used as we began the trip. Now, the last one was the idea of the alchemical marriage, or the alchemical wedding, which is the intermingling or the integrating and blending of primordial masculine with primordial feminine. And this was done because our trip was, on the most practical level, it was a trip from the Susquehanna River to the Sequoia National Forest in California. And that's what we were doing. And we were circulating arrows, or arrows, those are phonetically similar words, as a way of embodying the integration of opposites. So let me go a little bit deeper into the Sequoia connection, because I always thought it was kind of cool. For those of you who are familiar with the Susquehanna mystery, and I've talked about it considerably throughout the years, the occulted name, or the hidden name of the Susquehanna is Sequana. And the reason that is not only are they phonetically similar, Susquehanna and Sequana, but within the historical record in the Celtic tradition, in what we now call the continent of Europe, where river goddess worshiping was a practice, or a mainstay practice of that culture. There was a river known as Sequana with a corresponding river goddess, and she was the highest of all of the river goddesses in that culture. And there were, besides just the phonetic similarity between Susquehanna and Sequana, there were multiple correspondences between the Susquehanna and Sequana, which pointed to the simple conclusion that, they're related. And so the Sequana, the river goddess, and as the river, as an occulted name of the Susquehanna, is a river and river goddess is obviously has a feminine connotation. And then Sequoia, which also sounds very similar to Sequana, the Sequoia is the tallest known tree on Earth. And we can look at a tree as, what could be more phallic, symbolically phallic, from a primordial perspective. And so going from the Sequana river goddess to the Sequoia is the living symbol, embodiment of the connection of these two forces. And probably the only souvenir I took of the trip was I brought back a lot of pine cones, tiny little pine cones, probably like 3 inches, not even 3 inches, maybe about 2 inches from top to bottom. And they're really, really sturdy and robust. And whereas we brought the water out to the west, I brought those back to the east. And then the fourth thing which we grounded this trip with was with starboard ceremonies, literally building the current planetary configuration on the starboard in various places. We did 8 different ceremonies, and usually we linked it with the people who we stayed with. So these were the 4 practical might not be the right word, but grounding principles which we use to then go dive into something which we did not know what we're going to dive into. So before I get deeper into the actual story, I want to go through the mystery timeline, because this pilgrimage did not just come out of the blue. It was the cutting edge, if you will, of a much longer timeline, which I've been on. And I'll start this timeline on March 15th, which is when the Susquehanna mystery was discovered. And then spent a handful of years on the podcast circuit telling that story and kind of expanding upon synchromystic research and storytelling. But then things really took a shift for me on January 26th at the what I call the Kobe Bryant death ritual, and I gave a big presentation shortly after that, after Kobe Bryant's death on the Higher Side Chats, which was that presentation was released, or that interview was released just before the Corona ritual began, and so they're linked. The Kobe Bryant death ritual, my connection with the Synchromystic storyline, and then the cultural experience which we went through, which is known as the Corona ritual. Shortly after that, I started a 60-day church ritual where I house sat for a vacant church for 60 days. November 30th was just before my 50th birthday, which solar eclipse fell upon. I was extended an invitation by a group of Freemasons. I'm not a Freemason. And they wanted me to tell the Susquehanna mystery. The presentation was given on the 26th. I've talked about this a lot. There's a lot between this invitation extended and when the presentation was given, which happened to be on the birth date of the anniversary of the death date of Kobe Bryant. But that was a key marker on my mystery timeline. And then shortly after that, 6 days afterwards, the life I was living, it immediately fell apart. And since then, I feel like I have been on I don't even know, I wouldn't call it a downward spiral, but it's certainly the stability in how I lived life has changed considerably, beginning with me moving to Baltimore, which was a Nome countryside in the Amish farmland in Lancaster, Bechtelsville in Berks County, eastern Pennsylvania. Each one of these was really, really, I've gone into this in past videos, but they're deeper than, synchromistically much deeper than just purely like, moving from house to house. On June 15th of this year, Christy and I returned to the Susquehanna. We put up bell tents on a friend's property who lives right on the river, like literally the bell tents are 150 feet from the river, and we moved in on June 15th. June 19th, I officiated a wedding. I was asked to officiate a wedding by people who I kind of know. They lived, the place where they chose to have the wedding and the reception, they had no idea, was actually where I grew up. And that was, a key marker. Just 4 days after the move-in, I officiated the wedding. 2 days after that was the solstice. Christy and myself were guided by Zach, who owns the property, which we put our tents on, who's the foremost expert, probably the heir to become the foremost expert of the Susquehanna River petroglyphs, which are petroglyphs located on large boulders on the Susquehanna River, mysterious petroglyphs, and on there are our solstice, sunrise, and sunset markings. And so we paddled up at 4 in the morning at, maybe not that early, on solstice, and we were on the boulders and we watched the sunrise. And then 4 days after that, our cross-country journey, our pilgrimage began. July 4th, we reached the Pacific, and then July 28th, we returned home. So here is a picture, the map of where we went. The red dots are the trip out, the blue dots are the trip back. This is where we stayed, the number of nights. We stayed a combination of camping, Airbnbs, and then supporters of Susquehanna Alchemy, they hosted us. It was a phenomenal trip. It was like from just like a travel experience. It was I'd always wanted to take a cross country trip, and I never had for a variety of reasons. And I'd planned a couple times when they fell through, but this time, this instance, it actually came through. Divine timing, that sort of stuff. And as you'll see with the dates where things unfolded, and how they unfolded, like the timing was so perfect. So when I say that I wanted, like I always had an internal sense that I wanted to take a cross-country trip, and it never worked out. And then the how this worked out, the combination of the grounding principles and then this lead up on this mystery timeline, we're going to pay attention to the dates and how things lined up date-wise. So all right, let's jump into this. General themes that were revealed through synchromysticism. So now I'm talking about what the mystery showed us. And so what I described to you was what we had control over. This is where we're going to stay. This is where, the overall idea or tent stakes, if you will, of what the trip will be. But we're really looking to see what is life? What is the mystery going to reflect back? And so there were some general themes, and that's what we're going to talk about. Death, purification, the military-industrial and entertainment complex, Hollywood entanglement, the concept of manufacturing dream reality. Some key words: Southland Tales, Forrest Gump, Scaramanga Ranch, Los Alamos, U2, General Patton Museum. And I was ultimately left with this takeaway, this primary takeaway question. What is the difference between the fool who runs from life from the fool who is carried by life? So you might want to come back, or this question, which I pose right now, might make a little bit more sense once we go through all we're going to go through. So let us begin. All pilgrimages, including this one, the one I'm describing, are a lead-in to a rebirth for the pilgrim. The pilgrim goes and they take a meaningful journey, not for the journey's sake, but for the effect of the journey. It's not the destination, but the journey that matters. This is part of the human experience. We're prior to being civilized, we were nomadic beings, nomad, not mad, gnomes, gnome countryside, so forth. Anyway. Do you know about the Hindu flood myth? This may, if you're paying attention, this may make a little bit more sense towards the latter part of the presentation as well. But I'm going to begin here. A flood myth is a myth in which a great flood, usually sent by deity or deities, destroys a civilization, often in an act of divine retribution. Flood waters are described as a measure of cleansing of humanity in preparation for rebirth, and most flood myths also contain a cultural hero. As indicated earlier, the idea of a cleansing of humanity, a cleansing of the land, a cleansing of self, that was embodied by Christy and I as through the arrow circulation piece of what we were doing. So let's get into the good stuff. So Emily Moyer, if you're familiar with my work, you know that I've probably done close to 100 podcasts with Emily Moyer. We co-host 2 shows, one called Playing the Glass Speed Game, the other called Project Kids. And the idea of those shows, or at least the titles of them, playing the glass bead game is a game about the interconnectedness of reality and how one is able to, by moving quote unquote glass beads, change the outcome of reality. And then the other title, Project Kids, the other show we do, is more of a reference of government projects, which children were part of. But anyway, I'd never met Emily in person. Despite doing nearly 100 shows, it had always been a remote relationship which she and I shared. So on July 12th, she and I finally met face to face in Palm Springs. And what we see right here, the screenshots of my phone, me saying to her, like, hey, we're going to be in Palm Springs on Wednesday. You want to meet up? And then this is her saying, like, hey, look, let's go meet up in Palm Springs. I'll send you the address. And so this is the date. This is the date which we meet up. Good morning. Love the air out here. We'll check out at 11 a.m. Enjoy your meeting. We're going to meet for lunch. So July 12th, we're meeting in Palm Springs. On August 20th, Palm Springs, same Palm Springs, was hit with the biggest rainstorm in its history. The result was severe flooding, right? Here we see here the August 20th date, Palm Springs with the most rain in a single day, unprecedented flooding, biblical flooding. You can see all this sort of stuff. Palm Springs hit with the biggest rainstorm in its entire history. So this Palm Springs flood occurred 40 days after the visit of Emily. So we met on July 12th. The rains occurred on the 20th, and we can see that the number of days between these two dates is 40. And 40 days, if you're familiar with the biblical flood myth, is, 40 days is a key number. It rained for 40 days, I believe. But, whether the details, it didn't rain for 40 days in Palm Springs, but 40 days is one of the variables of the story. And to make it, one level deeper, in Genesis, the book of Genesis is where the flood narrative is told. It is in Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 and 12, where it talks about the 40 days. And, 7/12 could be also a date. July 12th is 7/12 as well. So the idea that we wanted to step into a purification ritual, as arrow circulators, on a certain degree, we can see how that has shown manifest, particularly as Emily and I, as we meet face to face for the first time, and literally our energy fields interact on the material plane, or at least the face-to-face material plane. There seems to be some degree of reflection back in the mystery. So now let's go on to the death of Sinead O'Connor. So, coinciding with the conclusion of the trip, which was July 28th, was the announcement of the death of pop star Sinead O'Connor. And her death was announced on July 26th. And this had within the collective consciousness, within the popular culture machine, this came with a lot of energy. And from a Synchromystic perspective, we can look at stars. We could look at popular culture icons as symbols, and Sinead O'Connor is synchromistically aligned with the Irish rock band U2. And then on July 10th, before her death, on July 10th, the reason I bring this up is because on July 10th, in an Instagram post, uncharacteristically, I called out the band U2. And so let's first talk a moment about this, why I say that Sinead and U2 are synchromistically maybe two sides of the same coin. First, we see that they're both Irish, there's that. Secondly is they both were of cultural significance, however you want to go and define that. They were most culturally significant around the same time period, which was the late 80s and 90s. And they both were positioned within the cultural story as socially conscious, uh, popular music stars. And Sinead O'Connor, her commercially biggest hit was a song called "Nothing Compares to You." It was literally spelled with the number 2 and the letter U, which is a mirroring of U2, which supports this idea of these two icons being mirrors of one another. And we can kind of go and see from their cultural peak in the late 80s, early 90s that their stories, like, I'm not necessarily suggesting that they're not real people. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, I don't know. But they certainly can be seen as stars, for that's how they are presented to the masses through the popular culture machine. But we can see, since when they were on par with one another, if you will, when they were both like at their peak of cultural significance, U2, which doubled down into the story of Babylonian culture. Their story goes from, like, let's just measure it in lifestyle, and culture's favorite scorekeeping mechanism, net worth. We see the U2 members are worth like $1.8 billion. Like, that's a company. As we see that Bono, the lead singer of U2, from, being what began as a socially conscious pop star, becomes this caricature, this Mephisto, who in the devil, and so, which is a play upon literally a demon. It comes from Mephisto, from a false legend where, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, Mephistopheles is the spokesperson of the devil in this false legend. And so he's embodying this, and, rewarded by our popular culture and their symbology with her 1.8 billion. And then Sinead O'Connor, her life just goes, and she has this real life, tragic life, and like money, her net worth is $1.5 million. Like, trust me, like, I got $60 in my bank account. So like $1.5 million is like a ton of money. But in relationship to this, we can go and see, that these two synchromistically aligned characters, they went, at one point where they were on par in the late 80s, early 90s, they went separate directions. So, okay. So back to this. On July 10th, I put out this Instagram post, and I say, I'm talking about where we were camping. Probably about a week earlier, was when we were camping, but the post was put out July 10th, and it says, in the shadow of Joshua Tree National Park. Our campsite was in the shadow of the Joshua Tree National Park. Joshua Tree National Park was ingrained into the collective consciousness through the 1987 album by U2 of the same name. Actually, the Joshua Tree in the album there's a picture of it. It's not from the national park, it's from another park, but nonetheless, by name, they're connected. And then I go on and I talk about how U2 is, the band is named after a type of CIA spy plane. It's called a U-2 spy plane. And then I talk about where we were camping was in the shadow of the General Patton Museum. General Patton is is in a rare group of a handful of generals, military leaders that are really ingrained in the collective consciousness outside of military history buffs, because, at the very least, they made a movie about General Patton. I believe it may have even won Best Picture in the early 70s. But nonetheless, I was pointing that out. I was saying, like, hey, this is where we're camping. We were camping. This was at our campsite in Chirocco Summit. And Chirocco Summit, the dry camp area is located right behind the General Patton Museum and all of this. So we camped right here. Here's the General Patton Museum, and it was all in the shadow of the Joshua Tree National Park. And we watched the full moon rise that night, and I was just aware or inspired of the trip and the energies around it. Interestingly, so upon the next morning, I listened to the Joshua Tree album. I don't think from the car ride then. That was July 3rd, and then we arrived on the Pacific Ocean on July 4th. And Joshua Tree is said to be the U2's exploration into comparing the difference between mythical America and actual America. Now, that was told from a cultural perspective, and I'm kind of doing the same thing, or we were doing the same thing from a mystical perspective. I listened to that album. There was a time in my life, when I was probably in high school and college, where I listened to that album all the friggin' time. So it was deep in my collective consciousness. I mean, I haven't listened to it for probably 25 years, but to listen to it again with my understanding of reality now, it was a very, very interesting perspective. And that was what was the impetus of all of this. And I write about that and talk about the relationship between popular culture and military-industrial complex, not just with U2, with Joshua Tree on this land, but we see right here is Coachella. And Coachella, this area right here, probably, I don't know, maybe 10 miles away from where we camp, still in the shadow of Joshua Tree. Currently, this is the location of possibly the most famous and most profitable music festival in the United States and the world. So it's still, this is connected collective consciously to popular music, military industrial complex. And interestingly enough, Palm Springs is where me and Emily met. So we camped here on the way going west. On the way back home is when we met up with Emily, and that's where all of this flooding happened. And so the way I see it, unconsciously, I put out this call on the collective consciousness, pulling up U2, linking it to this land at Joshua Tree, and then the response, if you will. The response came back with the ultimate cleansing of the tragic side of this U2 coin, the death of Sinead O'Connor. That's one way which we can go and look at it. We're going to come back to Sinead O'Connor's death a few more times in this presentation, but we're going to continue down this death and purification, if you will, themes that continue to show themselves. So the next chapter, if you will, is the death of Sky. On July 16th, we arrived in Crestone, Colorado. So this is Crestone. And we're visiting a friend. And while we were there, his 12-year-old dog, Sky, has been with him for 12 years, probably the most consistent companion our friend had in these 12 years. He dies, so it's a really big deal, the death of Sky. Now, Sky had a history of health issues, but the week before our arrival became really, really ill. And then on July 20th, while we're still there, Sky died. And then we buried Sky in the rocky soil of Crestone. Crestone, if you've ever been there, is a really unusual town. It has an unusual culture. It attracts a different type of person. Definitely, I recommend at least a visit. We stayed there for 5 days. Crestone is also right at the foothills of these mountains, of the Rocky Mountains, but on the other side is the Great Sand Dunes National Park, and so these are very extreme. The energies of the mountains and the energy of the great sand dunes with Crestone in the middle, whether or not that, I mean, I think it does. It plays a part into the life that naturally bubbles up on that land. That's kind of interesting. But anyway, let me go on with the story. So on June 29th, so that being 17 days before this picture, so we're traveling through West Texas, and I see this, we get gas, and there was this dog just like passed out in front of a convenience store where we're getting gas. And I take a picture and I send it to my son. So this is a screenshot of a text conversation between me and my boys. And so I send this picture, and then on July 18th, I take this picture 2 days before Sky died. This is Christy, this is Michael. You can see it's July 28th is when this was taken. When you really look at them up close, this juxtaposition of this like white dog, this husky lying on his side right here, just before death, and this dog, like immediately after this picture, just jumped right up and ran away, still full of life. But the black and white imagery, the checkerboard, the 33 nights. I mean, I'm going to take a little detour for a moment, like just talk about Freemasonry. Like, I'm not a Freemason, but Freemasonry keeps on showing up. We didn't plan it to be a 33-day trip, but it certainly did end up to be 33 days. We know that's a key number as it ties into the Freemasonic lore, and as is this black and white checkerboard duality of life, and all this sort of stuff. And one can go and look within popular culture, manufactured culture, and see all of the the black and white checkerboard symbology, but this is outside of it, so this is one of the questions which I was left with, or which I ponder, is like sometimes when I see contrived predictive programming of reality through the military entertainment complex, I'm like, okay, well, that's contrived, done by Masonic sorcerers. I don't know if they're Masonic sorcerers. I think there are. But when you see this, this gives me pause. There's a nice pun for you, pause, with these dogs. So that was interesting. That was a part of this presentation, or of the journey, as was burying animals, because this was not, the Sky here was not the only animal we buried. On our very, very final day, we were in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, and we picked up there was a dead owl on the side of the road, and we picked it up. And we brought it to, it got to the point when we're in West Virginia, we're gonna bring it and bury it back home. But by West Virginia, it smelled so bad. We were like, all right, we got to get rid of this. And so we buried it. And it just so happened to be the last place we stayed. So this was really the if we want to look at it ceremonially, this was the capstone, if you will, of our ceremony. And we buried this owl in Berkeley Springs. And shortly after we're staying at our friend Scotty's. He makes these amazing tree houses. We stayed in these tree houses in Berkeley Springs. We then went down to the actual springs in Berkeley, and there's a place where you can shower there with this. And we showered there, and we cleansed ourselves after all of that. So that's, we buried this owl in the rocky ground of the mountains of West Virginia, in the Appalachian Mountains. And though this owl didn't have a name, or not a name that we knew of, the word Sky is certainly a fitting connection to the owl. So now we're going to talk about death in the desert, because death just keeps on showing up. On July 21st, we returned to New Mexico. So we went through New Mexico, going east, and coming back, we were going through New Mexico, and we were planning on staying in Taos. But on the day which we were supposed to go and stay in Taos, the plans fell through, and we had to go find an Airbnb. And we decided we're going to stay. We saw that it was cheaper to stay in Santa Fe, and plus we're going to go to Santa Fe anyway, because I was going to meet up with Danny Katz, who lives in Santa Fe. And we couldn't. The due to the last minute timing of booking an Airbnb in our limited budget, we only had a few options. We found this Airbnb in this town of Madrid, which is south of Santa Fe, in between Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And so the reason why I give those details is, like, this wasn't planned. Like, a lot of the trip was planned. We're planning on being in Crestone. We're planning on going to all these different places. But Madrid was completely, like, was not part of our plan. And we booked the Airbnb without realizing what we're really getting into, because when we got there, we found out that the Airbnb, which we knew was we were booking a glamping site, like a glamorous camping site, but we didn't realize that it was an actual where we were sleeping, or where the Airbnb was an actual working movie ranch. It was called the Scaramanga Movie Ranch. And so we pull in there, and Scaramanga is named after a James Bond character. I'll get into that in a moment. But this is where we stayed in this covered wagon converted into there was a bed and there's a sofa. It was fantastic. And probably what it is for the people who are filming on their location, this offered a place for them to sleep, because this was a very remote location. So before we get into that, so the military industrial complex and the CIA, they show up again. So this is after that U-2 spy plane sort of post. We see that the Scaramanga Movie Ranch, it uses James Bond characters and films for all of its naming devices. The Goldfinger wagon, and Scaramanga is actually named after a James Bond fictional character, one of the bad guys. And we remember, not only is James Bond a spy, like a fictional spy, the man who is credited for creating James Bond, who's based upon John Dee, is Ian Fleming. And Ian Fleming's history, if you know Ian Fleming, Fleming wrote the blueprint for the Office of the Coordinator of Information, the department that turned into the OSS, which eventually became the CIA. So it's like, no matter how much we try to get away from it, like this CIA spy military industrial complex stuff, keeps showing itself. So this is where it starts getting real interesting. So this is the location of where the Airbnb was. And this is the town of Madrid. And you can see by this satellite image, like you can see there's a road here. It's pretty remote, because New Mexico in general is a remote state, and wherever there are towns or cities, like, outside of the town or city, there's not sprawl like you'll find in more populous areas. But Madrid, which is already a very small, remote town, outside of that is where we find the Scaramanga Movie Ranch. We didn't realize this is what we had signed up for. Here's a picture of the road which led up to it. We had to go up this really kind of questionable road. Like, we're driving Christie's 20 or 10-year-old Toyota Prius. Every other vehicle on this road is like designed for like steep off-roading. We're driving up there. We had no business being up there, but we get up there. So we go up there, and so this is the story. So we drive down here, and the directions are these like really specific directions, like turn right off the road onto the dirt road here, and don't follow your GPS because the GPS is wrong, and you go here and turn left. And this whole area, Madrid was my favorite place of the entire trip. And this part of Madrid, off of the town, like back in this area, is this I don't even know how to describe the housing that's there, but it was an unusual housing for unusual people who are like off the beaten path pirates. And we get lost. This is the first time we're lost. We're like, wow, we can't find this movie ranch. And we're driving around this really kind of like roads which are not easy to drive around. Finally, I wave someone down. I'm like, all right, I'm like, we're looking for this Airbnb movie ranch. It's somewhere around here. And the guy's like, yes, I'm gonna follow me and I'll drive you up there. Guy was, he drives us up into like the really steep stuff, and he's like, is your car in good shape? Do you think you're going to be able to make it? I'm like, I think so. He's like, all right, yeah, you're going to make it. And what he says to us, he's like, when you get up there, make certain you find the cemetery. Make certain you find the cemetery. So, all right. So up in the top of the road here is this where we're staying, is this Madrid Cemetery. You can see it's about 800 feet away from where we were staying on the top of the road. Or the top of the mountain. And don't be misled by this Google Maps road right here. This is what that road looks like. Like this is not a paved cul-de-sac. This is in the middle of nowhere. Like this is where they film scenes from Breaking Bad and so forth. So anyway, so we go to this cemetery. And it lived up to the reputation. This is, when you walk into it, the land of the dead. This is unlike any cemetery I'd ever been to. And so we arrived there on July 21st. We got there late at night. Not late at night, right around dusk. And we just went to bed. Christy was feeling really, really sick. And it was brutally hot. And the wind was tremendous that first night. The next day was when the heat came, and we more or less stayed inside this tent the whole day. And once the sun started going down, I went out exploring because I want to go, and I found the cemetery, and Christy's still in bed, not feeling well. And when I came back, I'm like, we got to go and see this. Let's wait till it gets a little bit cooler and we'll walk on over. So probably around 5:30, she's feeling better. It's cooler out, and we're going to walk this 800 feet, walk to the Madrid Cemetery. And as we're walking over there, it's the next day, we begin to hear the sounds of electric guitars. I'm like, what's going on here? And so as it turns out, on July 22nd, here in the Madrid Cemetery, there was a death metal festival from 6 p.m. to 12 a.m., then followed by a shamanic drum circle. Keep in mind, this is all just 800 feet from where we're camping in here. So looking at this, we're dealing with this theme of death, we have arrived here right after we buried Sky, and now we are in this remote area in this of historical significance or of interest, cemetery, and then there's this death metal festival welcoming us. Not even just that, when we went up there, it was before the concerts began, and the promoter who was responsible for setting the whole thing up, he came over and handed us a brochure, and I started a conversation with him, like, we're not from here, we're just passing through. So I gave him the brochure back. Actually, I ended up keeping it that was another souvenir I took. He's like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, we came from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He's like, oh my God, I'm from I've been to Lancaster. I know Lancaster. And he really was like, he was excited that we were there. He was excited we were there for a couple of reasons. One, he's the promoter. He wants people to come to it. Two, he knows how remote this concert is. So to get people to come to it was very remote. And he said that this concert was 2 years in the making. And so this was the pinnacle of this 2 years planning. And so he kind of introduced us to a bunch of people and walked us around. He wanted us to stay for the whole night. We didn't stay for the whole night. But then he also said something else. He was telling us a little bit about the history of Madrid and the area. And he said that he told me his last name. And he said, my last name is one of the 13 original families that founded Santa Fe. He was full Apache, was his genealogy. And so that welcoming from both the Madrid local to both as a Madrid local and then also a representation of a family which had great significance in that land historically. That to me was definitely a reflection back of being very, very well received there. This next slide, you can see this was probably taken when that whole, this picture was taken when that exchange between us and the promoter probably was occurring, because the sun hadn't gone down. You could see people are starting to gather. It wasn't until the sun went down, or maybe it was a little bit more so than that the concert actually began. But anyway, this was an actual footage from Best Part is the Crust. I don't know who that is. I just found this on Instagram. This is when that was taken. One little funny anecdote. So besides, like, I position that story as like we were well received by, an energetically foundational member of the community for us arriving there. And that's a really kind of like positive spin, I suppose, of the experience, because we wanted to sleep and we couldn't really sleep because the music was it was loud and it was demonic, or at least demonic sounding. But there's really nothing you can do about it. And then once it stopped, the shamanic drum circling began, and it was extraordinary drumming. But it was also really, really loud. And Christy was like, we got to do something. I need to go to bed. Who are these people? Like, don't they know people are sleeping? It's 2 a.m, like that was kind of like the conversation that was happening in the tent. And I'm like, we can't go over there. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to shut this down? Like, it doesn't make any sense. This is their concert. Like, that was the conversation that happened. So anyway, the next day we go and we meet Danny Katz, and we tell her the story, because by the next morning it was funny. Like, it was no longer we were in the experience, and you could laugh about it. And we tell the story to Danny, and Danny's like, oh wow, Madrid is it is an outlaw town. Like, when you live in Madrid, it's like, you kind of embody that energy. And just in general, like overall within all of the New Mexico, outsiders or tourists or visitors, like, they're low on their totem pole. So like the idea of like a tourist coming in and being like, hey, you got to go and stop this. She's like, yeah, you were like up in the mountain. She's like, there's a chance you would probably wind up dead. I mean, she's being funny, but that was a funny story for me. Like, like the idea of confronting the outlaws, be like, keep your shamanic drumming down, and the 2 a.m, probably most of them wouldn't think twice, maybe, but throw us in a ditch. But nonetheless, that was only part of the story. That is only part of the story, because this is where it gets really, really interesting with death in the desert. So we arrived. You could see right here. So this was Saturday, July 22nd. This is when the concert was. I took this picture with my phone. So when you see these images with the time date stamp on the bottom, this was when I took the picture. It was we arrived on the 21st. The next day, I told you I was walking around while Christy was still in bed. And that's when I took these pictures. So it's the 22nd, but we arrived the day before on the 21st. As it just so happened that Christopher Nolan's highly anticipated film Oppenheimer was released on the 21st. And the story of Oppenheimer is the story of the father of the nuclear bomb, and much of the movie takes place in the military-industrial complex site where the bomb was made, Los Alamos. So again, we've got a military-industrial complex. Now we've got Hollywood. We're literally in a Hollywood movie ranch, and now this Hollywood movie comes out, this highly anticipated movie. And not just that, if you're familiar with my work, like I talk about movies a lot, but Christopher Nolan always is special when I talk about movies, because I have a seemingly mysterious connection how Christopher Nolan films are spot on connected to my personal life, whether that is Interstellar, The Watch, whether it is the car used in Tenet, whether it was the Freemasonic birdcage that came to me from, that lined up with the Prestige. Like the Nolan films speak to me. So when a Nolan, not only is it a movie about New Mexico and the date, but the person who made the movie, Christopher Nolan, it hits on so many levels. So here we could see this is Madrid, and this is Los Alamos, and yeah, it takes an hour and 11 minutes to get there by car, but the actual distance is about 30 miles. It's really, really close. And not only that, when you go and you look at the history of Madrid, and I could probably do a whole presentation just on that and its connection with the Susquehanna. But Madrid started as a coal town, and, you know, in its history, like Madrid literally provided the coal for Los Alamos as they were doing or participating in this Manhattan project. So as this secondary Manhattan Project shows itself in the ethers of the Hollywood collective consciousness, you know, we find ourselves in the actual physical land where it fueled that. So, but it goes deeper because this is all about death. Probably the one of the most powerful moments in the entire movie is when Murphy, so he's the actor who plays Oppenheimer, delivers the iconic line, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." You know, that quote is tied to the movie. So death. So we're talking about death in the desert. We're met with death. We came from the death of Sky. We've got the death of Sinead O'Connor, all this sort of stuff. And then this movie, like in itself, is just like dovetails so perfectly, synchromistically. The key line is, "Now I become death." So let's tie this together with Sinead O'Connor. So this is a quote from Robert Oppenheimer from way back when. I don't know where it originated from. "We knew the world would not be the same." And what he's talking about was when they detonated the bomb at the test bomb at the Trinity site. Now, I'll put a little asterisk next to it because some of you are probably thinking at home, you're like, well, there was never any bomb and it's all just, you know, there's no such thing as nukes. That may be true. It very well may be true. And in fact, I personally tend to lean towards that line that nuclear bombs are just another boogeyman, which is created by you know, the ghost storytellers. But nonetheless, the story, the history that the nuclear bomb was detonated at Los Alamos, that is 100% real in the collective consciousness. And so from that level, we're just going to talk from that level for now. So we knew that the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few people cried, most were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, oh God, am I going to be able to say this correctly? The Bhagavad Gita. I can never say that. So I remember the line from the Hindu scripture where Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on the multi-armed form. So Vishnu takes on the multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or the other. So this is Vishnu right here. For those of you who are familiar with like the statue in CERN, this ties into all of that, like all this imagery. But where this gets really, really wild is Sinead O'Connor, her final, her last studio album, which came out in 2014, was originally called The Vishnu Room. It was changed to I'm Not Bossy, I'm the Boss. We're not even going to go there. But there was still a single called The Vishnu Room. So we go and we can see what began and ended with Sinead O'Connor's death. We could also see links in so much with this timing of Oppenheimer and Los Alamos and all this other sort of stuff. And this is all like So there are two things I want to say right now. One is, from what I gathered recently by doing the research for this presentation, is Sinead O'Connor was, right before she died, she was putting the finishing touches on a studio album, probably her first studio album since 2014. So this will no longer be her final studio album. There's going to most likely be that other studio album released after she died, which will probably sell 100 times more than if she didn't die. And so you got all that going on. So I'm going to be interested to see, in light of this presentation, the names of this album, the names of the songs on that album. But I also want to go and point out, for the most part, everything which I had been talking about. Yes, I was a part of it, me as an individual, but there is it's all going through, I'm watching the signs, which are popular culture signs. I'm just kind of more or less interpreting those, because we're going to go a little bit deeper now into something which is more personal and maybe even stranger. Hollywood entanglement and the manufacturing of the dream reality. Southland Tales and Forrest Gump. So, on July 4th, I found myself at the Santa Monica Pier. And I really wasn't excited to be there. I didn't want to go there to begin with. That was always part of the plan. Christy's 10-year-old daughter, she wanted to be on Santa Monica when we got there. And for, 10-year-old girl reasons. And me as a 50-year-old man reasons. I was like, I don't want to be there. I don't want to be in those crowds. I don't want to be in the city. But I'm not gonna rain on a little 10-year-old girl's parade. So I ended up going there. I ended up having a great time. I had so much fun there. The people watching was fantastic. But nonetheless, so here are pictures. July 4th, 7:43, 7:48, 7:49. I took this picture. This is me in total costume. The reason why I took that picture is this is at the very end of the pier. I took it, as you can see, like that picture, and then I take a picture of me because I just had a realization. We walked the length of the pier, and I'm enjoying myself. I'm like, wow, this is a lot of fun. And then I had the realization that July 4th on the Santa Monica Pier was the setting of one of my favorite films of all time. The often panned, rarely seen Southland Tales. So it's funny, it says right here, this article which came out in 2023, why Southland Tales is one of the greatest movies of the 21st century. Chances are you haven't heard of it. Southland Tales was the film that Richard Kelly, who was the director and then also the screenwriter, the film he made after Donnie Darko. So Donnie Darko came out. Donnie Darko was this huge independent hit, and then he had all of this Hollywood capital, and he could go and do whatever he wanted for his follow-up, and he makes this movie called Southland Tales. And as you can see right here, the box office, it came out in 2006. The box office is $374,000 on a budget of $17 million. Percentage-wise, that's a huge loss. More so, though, you can't have a bigger flop in Hollywood. This was designed, compare it to Oppenheimer and Barbie, which was also takes place in Santa Monica. And I could really go deep into those, but I'm already an hour into this and just don't have the time or energy. Those movies, made $100 million on their opening weekend. $374 is over the entire box office. This movie was completely panned. It was shown at the Cannes Film Festival, and people were booing it and laughing at it. But now it's being looked at as one of the greatest, or at least this article is being looked at as one of the greatest movies of the 21st century. I saw it probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and I loved it. And so let's go into it. I'm going to tell you a little bit as to why this is important. So just know, this is a lesser known movie. If you've seen Donnie Darko, you know that Kelly deals with ideas of reality and all sorts of strange things, and Southland Tales is no different, except it's funny. It's funnier. So let me read through this. The complex plot of Southland Tales explained. One of the reasons why it was so rejected is it was a complex plot. There are a lot of storylines, but as you can tell by my style of storytelling, I like a lot of storylines. I like a lot of complexity, so obviously that would make sense. It would speak to me. Southland Tales is a complex and surreal science fiction film directed by Richard Kelly. I would call it more of a black comedy. The plot is set in a dystopian near-future Los Angeles, where the United States is on the brink of a social, political, and environmental collapse. The story revolves around several interconnected characters and subplots, and understanding the main plot requires delving into the various threads that converge as the film progresses. So, I mean, that should sound familiar, at least in terms of how I tell these stories. All right. Southland Tales takes place in an alternative version of 2008, alternative timelines, where the United States is more sharply divided by political parties than ever before. The Republican Party plans to introduce a new surveillance system that would invade all civilians' privacy, and a neo-Marxist group of rebels aim to destroy it. There are side stories dedicated to the rise of tech corporations, experimentation on military veterans using drugs, and quantum entanglement. So remember, this movie came out in 2006, probably written 2004, 2005. Quantum entanglement. That's the key thing which I really want to pull out, because that's where we're going to lean into. So here's another piece from the description of Southland Tales. During the 4th of July event, so a key part of the movie is called the 4th of July event. The climax of the movie takes place the 4th of July. There is a rift in the the space-time continuum. And so as this happens, so when the narrative reaches the climax, what's the climax? The 4th of July event. The boundaries between reality and fiction become increasingly blurred. Right? The boundaries between reality and fiction become increasingly blurred. So throughout the film, so they're talking about Southland Tales. Private pilot Albaline, it's played by Justin Timberlake. The film is an ensemble cast with all of these actors and actresses playing roles which they normally don't. It's really, really funny. I recommend watching this film for a variety of reasons. But anyway, so in this film, Private Abilene sits perched on top of the end of the Santa Monica Pier on the rooftop of Maria Sol restaurant. Right here. This is where this is Maria Sol restaurant right here. This is where this key part of the movie, like this right here, we can see, where is it? That's Justin Timberlake right here, and this is the Santa Monica Pier. This is the Ferris wheel on the Santa Monica Pier. The reason why it's on the theatrical movie poster is because it is so key to the storyline, that setting. So here I am on the 4th of July. This is that same Ferris wheel. This is at the end of the pier. This is me taking a picture. This is me taking a picture of myself when I realize what is friggin' happening as this 4th of July event, space-time continuum rift occurs, and the boundary between reality and fiction are blurred. Now, I have no idea what this is going to mean. I just know that this is happening in front of me. This is me laughing inside. Like, look how stone-faced I am. Look how stone-faced I am. I hold a stone face. Inside I'm laughing. All right. So this is Santa Monica Pier. This right here is the end of the platform. This is right out here. It's where Maria Sol is. That's what this one says right here. If you look closely, Maria Sol. This and when I take this picture. This is at the end. This is literally behind Maria Sol, and this is where I was. You could tell that this is where I was walking towards when I took the picture, because I'm looking back in this direction. Right around here is the Ferris wheel, and maybe that's the Ferris wheel right there. And I'm shooting this way, so I'm walking towards here. And we start getting hungry. It's 4th of July. Like, I know quantum entanglement's happening, and I know there's a rift in the time-space continuum. I'm like, I don't know what to look for. Or I don't know how that's going to show itself. And we're hungry in, like, actual walking reality. And so we start walking from here all the way to here. And every place we go to, we're in Santa Monica, we're on the pier, we're on the 4th of July, and we're going to have, like, an authentic Santa Monica on the pier 4th of July experience. And every single one of like there are a handful of restaurants and there are food stands. Everything is just like mile long lines. And like, no, let's keep going. And we eventually reach right here. And now we're like almost defeated. We're tired. We're hungry. And there's an open table. Of course there's an open table. It's the Bubblegum Shrimp Company. Who's going to want to eat at this contrived Planet Hollywood restaurant? But at this point, like, that's the only thing that's available. And like, beggars can't be choosers, and we go and we have dinner. We have dinner there. In fact, I think all we had was a bowl of gumbo. I think I had myself a beer, and I think Naomi probably got some kids thing. So at this moment, like, just to put this into context, because we're going to shift gears a little bit, we're going to come back to this. There was, there's a rift in this, in theory, there's a rift in the time-space continuum. We're literally on the location at the time where the rift in the time-space continuum happens, and we step into this Hollywood byproduct bubblegum shrimp house. All right. The entanglement finally shows itself on July 15th. So on July 15th, we just spent a couple nights in Sedona. Amazing time in Sedona. Like, again, that could be an entire presentation, talk about Sedona. And we were going to drive to Crestone. You already know the story of Crestone. That's where Sky is. So this is, side note, me telling this story is very much like both Southland Tales or Christopher Nolan films, these very convoluted or complex storylines where they're told in different order. I recognize I'm doing it right now because I'm going back and forth in time. So July 15th, we leave Sedona and we're driving. It's a 10-hour car trip. And we decide right here, we booked an Airbnb. This was midpoint. It was right in the Monument Valley, and there was a unique Airbnb experience that we could stay in a teepee. So we're like, let's go and stay there. So here's the teepee. So Monument Valley has an undeniable mystical quality and has long been seen as sacred landscape. We were traveling to see our friend in Crestone. We knew he was caring for a sick dog. So Sky hadn't died yet. The first confirmation we were exactly where we needed to be was this Airbnb. The Airbnb host. So this is what's crazy. So we stay at this Airbnb, and we chose it because it was this teepee. We want to have it was like the right place, midpoint, and it was the right price, and it was an interesting experience, and it was a great night. We had a starboard ceremony there. There were a couple of places to stay on this property. We're the only ones staying there, and it just so happened that the host's name was Sky. Now, we knew Sky was sick, but we did, when we stayed here, Sky was still alive. But we recognized that the idea of Sky as an archetype was in play. But what gets really interesting also, particularly in hindsight and all, which we're telling you, is, so this is where we stayed, the Monument Valley Airbnb. And less than a mile is this thing called Goulding's Lodge of Monument Valley. And this is all called Goulding's, this whole sort of like complex in this very, very, Monument Valley is pretty remote. And Goulding started out as a Hollywood set. So this is before we even got to New Mexico. New Mexico is another, July 21st, where this is July 15th. So we've got 6 more days before we get to that movie set. We don't even know we're going to that movie set yet, but we stay here, and it turns out that Goulding, Harry and Mike Goulding, Mike is apparently a woman, they journeyed to Hollywood, California. This is in the, post-Depression era, and with $60 in their pocket. And by luck and perseverance, Harry met the famous director John Ford, and then Harry showed Ford pictures of Monument Valley and said it was a perfect location for his next movie. And then they filmed Stagecoach by John Wayne, and Monument Valley became a set for Hollywood. And so, I'm just putting into the context of all of this, like Hollywood seems to be showing up again, because remember, like there's been this quantum entanglement with Hollywood that literally happened right in this place. So next day we sleep here, we get here at night, we get there, this is like 9 o'clock at night, probably arrived around 7:30. We get up in the morning, we literally go to Goulding's coffee shop. Feels really, really creepy. We're like, let's get the hell out of here. We got to get out of here. We're going to Crestone. And as we're driving out of town, so this is Monument Valley, this is Goulding, Monument Valley Airbnb, we're driving on this road, and I see this sign. Forrest Gump Hill. Reality and fiction are blurring. All right. So we're driving through, and I'm trying to make sense of this because I knew that, I'm aware of, somewhat aware of, what's happening as it's unfolding. And that we went to Bubblegum Shrimp House and, the timing of being on the Santa Monica Pier on the 4th of July and quantum entanglement and all this sort of stuff. And then we go and we see in the middle of nowhere this Forrest Gump Hill. And it had been a long time that I had been I'd seen Forrest Gump. So, from the trip from Monument Valley to Crestone, I'm doing a little bit of research, and I'm finding out all the stuff on Forrest Gump, and I'm like, what is this? What is this stuff about Forrest Gump? Does this feel right? Like it's lining up? But I'm asking myself all these questions, like internally. And as we're doing that, this other symbol, the symbol of us being arrow circulators, shows itself loud and clear, because we pass by this, like the road which we're driving just goes right here in front of this Mud Creek Hogan trading post. And this is what it looks like. This is probably 30 feet in the air, these enormous arrows. Here's another picture. We actually then, like, it was such an obvious symbol speaking to us. So we stopped when we went into the store. And Christy had a question, like a very practical question as it related to a stone which she had questioned about its authenticity, whether it was an acrylic made stone or the actual one. And she was able to get clarity in this place because there were expert jewelry makers there who worked with the same type of stone. So in many ways, this was a set and setting for clarity for us. So we stopped by and clarity. And so the confirmation of the enormous arrows that we couldn't mix told me that the information which I was gathering on Forrest Gump, I should take seriously. So, okay. So within the movie Forrest Gump, running is a major theme. Like it begins with Forrest as, if you remember the movie, Forrest was a young boy and like they were chasing him in a truck. He grew up in Alabama and he was being chased by a bunch of yahoos because he was a bit of an imbecile, and he had braces on his legs and the truck is chasing after him, and then Forrest starts running and the braces break off of his leg and he's able to outrun the truck. And then he goes to college he goes to University of Alabama, a football school, and he becomes like their star kickoff return, where like his running, just no one could tackle him. So running was this theme within the Forrest Gump film. And then later on in the movie, Forrest Gump, like as he came across hardships, he started this cross-country run, and he just ran and ran and ran and ran. And as he's running all over the country, people start noticing him, and he gets this crowd of people that are following him. And keep in mind, the reason I'm saying this is because somehow or another, the character known as Mike Wan, me, quantum entangled with Forrest Gump during, at least in theory, in this Santa Monica experience. So I'm looking at Forrest Gump and I'm like, am I Forrest Gump? How am I Forrest Gump? Maybe that's a better way of me asking that question. So the reason why this sign exists, the reason why this Forrest Gump Hill, this Forrest Gump Point exists, is because in the context of the film of Forrest Gump running and all these people following him, and this being like all of the running which has served him his entire life as a young boy, as a football player, it's here that he stops running. He stops running, and Forrest Gump, the character, has an epiphany. He's like, I don't need to run anymore. I don't need to run anymore. And this is when he stops running. And where this scene, which was very, very pivotal in the movie, or at least within the character development within the movie, like it took place right here in Monument Valley. Like this is the road. This is the road we're driving on right here. And this is the road, you see it right here. That's the same road. And so the first question I need to ask myself is like, because this is a pilgrimage. It's an arrow circulation pilgrimage. And my life has been in, as I said before, when looking at this timeline here, like my life has gotten really strange. Like probably up until 2014, like I lived a very, very regular life. I may have been unusual on the inside, but my lifestyle was very common. And then this is when it started becoming less, more and more off the mainstream. And then right after this Masonic presentation, it's beginning on January 2nd, 2022, is when it all turned into this experience of going from floating from place to place, of not having the stability which I had been accustomed to. But then I'm asked by, this question from this quantum entanglement film is forcing me like, what am I running from? Am I running from something? So I was left to ponder with that, and this is what I was thinking about. This is what I discovered as we were driving from Monument Valley to Crestone. But it gets even more specific, because in the film, when Forrest stops, there's a narration, and like Forrest is narrating this, and he's saying that he literally says, I ran for 3 years, 2 months, 14 days, and 16 hours. One of the few details the movie reveals about Forrest's run, because they don't really explain why he's running. And we could see there's a specific date from like when I got to this place. So that's just simple mathematics, subtract 3 years, 2 months, 14 days from this July 15th, 2023. And when you do that, you come to May 1st, 2020. May 1st, 2020 was when this 60-day church ritual began for me. Just to give a little bit more evidence of this, here's an Instagram post for a video which I put up on YouTube. It may still be up there. And it's called Man in the High Church, the 30-Day Update. This was the church. It was just me in this 25,000 square foot church. It was friggin' wild. But after 30 days, I made this video. And this was posted on May 29th, 2020. So, do the math. This brings us to May 1st, 2020. And interestingly enough, the reason I was in the church is I was in a relationship at that time, and I needed space from it. And so I guess you could say in a certain way I was running from it. And in the Forrest Gump film, like he started running because of his relationship with Jenny. Sure enough, that would be the name of who I was in a relationship with. But okay, so this leads me to this question, right? I posed this in the beginning. It was like, am I to conclude that I am a fool running from life like Forrest? But like most things, the synchromystic quantum entanglement isn't so simple. Because also within the Forrest Gump film is another theme. And remember, Forrest Gump had an enormous impact on the collective consciousness. It was a huge box office smash. So like tons of people watched it. It was like Best Picture, like it was really well done. I'm pretty certain it won Best Picture, at least was nominated for Best Picture. It was very, very well done. And it specifically spoke to the baby boomer generation. I remember it came out the year I graduated college. It came out in the spring I graduated college. I remember seeing it in the movie theater in Richmond. But nonetheless, in the movie, another theme was the feather. And so the opening credits, the closing credits, and then whenever something of significance would happen within the film, like this feather would be in the background, this feather being carried by life. I also want to point out this one thing before I get to where I'm going with this. So where are we? Right here. So it began in Sedona, and then we drove right here. This is where the trip began. This is where the Forrest Gump thing happened. This is for like those of you who really are into the dark underbelly of conspiracy. Right here, I'm pretty certain it was right here, right outside of Flagstaff, is, for those of you who remember Isaac Cappy, who was found dead on Route 66. And it was theorized by many internet sleuths and conspiracy theorists that Cappy was ritualistically murdered due to his expose of Forrest Gump. So I'm just throwing that out there. But anyway, so back to the primary story. Forrest Gump and the feather is a significant theme as well. And so if we go back to the beginning of this presentation, where we said that it started with the Susquehanna River, and yes, I talked about Sequana, but how we talk about, or the primary name for this oldest river on the planet is Susquehanna, and Susquehanna is said to be a Lenape word. In the same language where this all began, the Algonquin language, we can see that Mike Wan literally means feather, my birth name. So now I'm left with a bigger question to begin to ask. But before we go there, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to flip this up on you right away. And I'm going to introduce the concept. Apophenia. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. And apophenia is a often dismissive term for finding meaningful connections between unrelated things. Originally, when the term was coined in 1958, it was linked with the beginning stages of schizophrenia. And he said, he defined it as this Klaus Conrad defined apophenia as unmotivated seeing of connections accompanied by a specific feeling of abnormal meaningfulness. So things that shouldn't be connected, you're connecting and then applying meaningfulness where there's no meaningfulness, right? That sounds really familiar. Since then, the term has softened where it's saying, well, ultimately what this is saying is like meaningful pattern recognition, behavior, is tied to schizophrenia or mental illness. And schizophrenia in our culture is like the worst thing, the worst mental illness you can really be categorized. The definition has softened. Now saying like, there's, where does it say? However, high levels of pattern seeking are not identical to apophenia, saying that you can do this sort of stuff and not be schizophrenic. The result of sensitive pattern detection systems can either be adaptive or maladaptive. But if it's adaptive, it has to be accompanied with the capacity to distinguish between true and false patterns among those detected. And the reason I bring that up, which is funny, because obviously I just spent 90 minutes talking about, with great amount of sincerity, the meaningfulness of a apophonetic perspective of reality. And now I'm going to go and at least look at it from other perspectives. And the reason why I'm doing this now is because this pilgrimage journey, which I'm sharing with you, like I feel like it's come up to a crescendo, like it's come up to the, for me, a very personal sort of question, which is, as seen by the Forrest Gump, the poignant turn in his life. Has he stopped running? Has he just always been the feather? That sort of stuff. So we're changing the gears a little bit. Psychedelic use is known to enhance pattern recognition ability. Pattern recognition enhancement is accompanied and coincided by blah, 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 and it's commonly induced under the influence of mild dosage of psychedelic compounds. I'm not a psychedelic user. Like, I have a little bit of experience in my lifetime, but, I know people who've done a lot of psychedelics, and that's certainly not me. Probably can count on two hands the amount of times that I've ever done mushrooms, anything else, also including, if you want to include ayahuasca. So there's that. And then the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center is renowned for its research into causes of schizophrenia, which it did with LSD. So the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, established on the grounds of Spring Grove Hospital, as a result of public interest and research, pioneered there the use of the psychedelic compound LSD in schizophrenia. So what I'm pointing out right now is there's a real kind of like interesting concept where they're like, oh, well, pattern recognition is identified as a beginning sign of schizophrenia, and the very people and this pattern recognition is brought out about by LSD, and the very organizations that were studying schizophrenia are also doing it within LSD. So we see there's an interesting relationship right there. And I also want to point out this, that there is a history of, or a precedence of, MK Ultra programs, which were often done underneath the guise of schizophrenia research or cure for it. And they also used LSD. I also want to point out that, as we talked about the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, the chief researchers in the 60s, they went on to become the psychedelic gurus of the New Age movement, which unfolded. Here we see, this is talking about Stan Groff. He was the chief psychiatric researcher at this for the Spring Grove experiment. This is talking Spring Grove, which later became part of the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. This is just naming, it's the same institute. And then he was also the assistant professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins. And then in 1973, he moved to the Esalen Institute. So I'm assuming many of you know the significance of Esalen. So if not, we'll go look into it. But anyway, so this is where I'm going with all of this. I grew up in a Rockefeller-funded new town designed by experts. It was surrounded by leading government scientists of mind manipulation via psychedelics at the highly controversial Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, and the Fort Meade-based Project Stargate, the inspiration for the TV program, if you will, Stranger Things. I grew up here. This is where MPRC is, this is where Fort Meade was, and this is where I was when all of this experimentation was going on. So I am concluding part 1 of this presentation. And in part 2, I'm going to pick up where I just left off, linking in more or less everything which I shared within this video, the ability or capability to identify these patterns, how this ability or capability seems to have found itself, and what I can do with it. So that stuff is immensely more personal, and I'm not exactly comfortable putting that out completely on the internet. And also, I need a means to be able to support myself to some degree. So for those of you who've stuck around this long, obviously you're somewhat interested in this topic. If you want to see part 2, I'm going to ask that you send me $9 via PayPal to this address, or if you use Venmo, use this. Or even if you want a Starboard integration ceremony, I do those remotely, you could contact me to get more details about it. But anyway, that's where I'm ending this part 1 right now. I appreciate all of your patience and attention, and I'll see you on the other side of this presentation.